All right, Tom, what are your opinions on the scientific establishment and how it relates to the health of people today?
Okay, let's right away just distinguish science from what you said in your question, which was scientific establishment, because the science is just a way of sharing. Science just means knowledge, and it's a way of sharing things. And it's a way of sharing things in a very reliable way. Now, that doesn't mean all science is equally reliable. You know, there's junk science and there's good science. But well done science, which is reviewed, has the tremendous advantage of people saying, well, okay, but not under these conditions, and then being able to have an experiment and prove it. And when you talk about something religious, when you talk about something that is an article of faith, you don't have that comparison. So I regard science as a very strong tool in that way to move towards the truth. I'm not saying there isn't a religious truth. I'm just saying that in matters of fact, in matters that we could determine in terms of the health of the body, what things are more healthy for which people at which time is a determinable thing through science. We haven't done all the science yet. We don't know all the answers yet, but it is a determinable thing.
Yeah, now what would you say to people who say that what you do could be deemed unscientific, where there's no quote-unquote evidence to it?
Okay. Unscientific and not evidence-based, I would again say, are two different things.
Or
yes?
pseudoscience.
Or pseudoscience. Well, I'm not trying to pass off what I'm doing as science, so I would get out of that pseudoscience thing right away, because I'm just saying this is a map. Now, the map makes two predictions. The anatomy trains map, the putting together the muscles in these strings of sausages that I call the myofascial meridians, that's not pseudoscience, that's just a supposition. That is a map. It's no more supposition than the biceps does this, right? You can see that the biceps does that, so it's doing that. Is that all that it's doing? No, I don't think so. I think it's also part of this string. Now, the first, you have to do two things to make this to make the whole anatomy trains, myofascial meridians a valid idea. One is, are there those connections? Well, we went into the lab, we did the dissections. We've done the dissections many times on all the lines, and every one of the lines can be taken out as a fascial unity. And there are people who say, no, you're just carving the lines. You can carve anything out of a human. I say, well, maybe. But we are doing a discipline. We are following the fascial fabric, and it has to be going in the same direction. In other words, there has to be a line of pull. We're talking about a line of tension. As we were earlier with the tensegrity idea, we're talking about a line of tension. A line of tension, the more you pull on it, the straighter it gets. That's the way tension works. So you ought to be able to see the fibers or find or dissect the fibers that connect one sausage to the next sausage. And we have, and I believe that that's fairly well demonstrated. So I think we have evidence for an evidence base. Anyway, it has to be repeated by other labs, but I have every assurance that it will be. The second question is also a valid question, and one that's not answered yet, which is there myofascial force transmission from this muscle across what we call the muscle attachment, but I just call a station because it's a place where the fascia tacks down onto the underlying fascia, but it is not stopping. The muscle keeps going fascially into the next. So while most people take their scalpel and go boom here and separate this one from this one, we take our scalpel and go this way and separate this one from the underlying, like that. So it's a different way of using the scalpel, and it results in a different set of connections. Instead of having the connection from this muscle to this bone, we now have the connection from this muscle to this muscle. Does it have a connection to the bone? Well, sort of. It has a connection to the periosteum of the bone. It has a connection to the plastic wrap coating around the bone, but it also has a connection to the next muscle up. I think we've established that pretty well. How much force transmission is there from this muscle to this muscle over this station, over this muscle attachment? That has yet to be determined. That, however, is also a determinable thing by science. We just haven't done it yet. If there's any physiotherapy graduates out there looking for a PhD thesis, boy, do I have some theses for ideas for you in terms of how we could look at that myofascial force transmission. Franklin Miller, Fukunaga, some other people have shown myofascial transmission across these. Andrew Fleming took his anterior and posterior oblique slings and have looked at the forces going through the abdominal fascia in the front and the thoracolumbar fascia in the back, what in the anatomy trains we call the front and the back functional lines. And I absolutely see these connections. If you do a forward bend, you get some part of the superficial back line. If you do a back bend, you're going to get some part of the front line. These things are really evident in looking at people, looking at Naudi doing functional patterns. I can see these lines in action. But the scientific question remains, how much force transmission is there from one aspect to the next of the anatomy trains? I don't think it takes away, whether there is or isn't, that would be an interesting question to answer, but it doesn't take away from the way that anatomy trains pattern the body. But it does bear on how much tension in the belly could end up pulling the head forward without pulling the chest down. If there is transmission across the bones from one soft tissue to the next soft tissue, then you could have this action at a distance without involving every part of the skeleton between the source and the effect. That's what I see in the body, so that's what I suspect is happening, but we haven't got the science to prove that action at a distance yet.
What are your opinions on scientific studies?
Well, as I say, there are good scientific studies and junk scientific studies, and I've gotten better at reading research and being able to read between the lines to see whether it's good research or bad research, but I actually also rely on people like Robert Schleip and Leon Chetow and Tom Findley and other people in the fascial field to help sort out what's good science from what's bad science in that regard. In the field of training that you're so involved in, there's a lot of junk science coming out now that may show something, but has so many variables packed into the way the study was designed that you can't really glean much from it. And the other end, really good science in the training field, has to narrow the field so much. It's only people between 30 and 35, healthy males who had no low back problems, and then they do this exercise and they see what happened. Those things are so narrow. Yes, they're true, they're good science, but they're so narrow, it's hard to apply them out over a much wider population of women and older and younger people and differently abled people, or people who have large tops and small bottoms versus people who have small shoulder girdles and large hips. Any of these things could make variable differences. You also get variable differences in people's physiology. Are they an ectomorph or a mesomorph or an endomorph? Are they mostly governed by their muscles? Most of the people that you see in your training thing are mesomorphic people. Those are the people attracted to training because they're mesomorphic people. They're in their muscles and their bones and their joints. Ectomorphic people, long, thin bones and wiry muscles, don't show up as much at the gym, but they still have bodily needs. They just respond differently. And endomorphic people, I don't mean somebody who's just gone to pot and gotten a belly, but endomorphic people who have more gut governance. They're governed more by their gut system. They also don't show up at the gyms so much because they're feeling people. But if you were to, as the training industry begins to reach out into a wider population, not just the jocks, not just the people who want to do this, but the people who need it, they are going to have different strategies for these endomorphic people that will build muscle tone, lose weight, bring them into themselves. But it's going to involve an expansion of the training industry as well as an expansion of the science that we look into these things with. Science is a tool. You read the studies, you go with those studies, but you go to the most wonderfully evidence-based physiotherapist, Diane Lee, and I went to her practice for the afternoon. She works intuitively. Like everybody else, the science kind of tells you where not to go. Scientific studies are really good as riverbanks, okay? I'm not going to go out here because I know I'm outside the science, but it doesn't tell you exactly where the river flows. That's intuitive work in your office.
Can you have bad intuition?
Can you have bad intuition? You sure as hell can have bad intuition. In my trade of manual therapy, there's a whole thing of energy work. when I lay on hands and I'm feeling the energy, the chance for fooling yourself in that kind of work, I'm not saying that that kind of work is invalid. It can be very valid, and people who can do really well in it. But the capacity, especially when you're starting out, for fooling yourself in that kind of intuitive thing is really strong. And a lot of people in gym work who are doing training, well, I'm getting really good results and I'm doing this exercise. But are they getting the good results as a result of that exercise? Or are they getting those good results because they have really good interpersonal skills, and so people feel much better as they come out of a session with them? They would feel much better as they came out of a session with them if they played tiddlywinks. It's the quality of communication that is making the result. You don't know until you do a scientific study whether it's the exercise that's producing the result, or placebo that's producing the result, or something else that's producing the result.
What about things like chi energy? What are your perceptions on chi energy, or things like the 6 chakras? What is your perspective on that in terms? Because I mean, people would consider that a potential pseudoscience. What's your?
Oh, that isn't even pseudoscience. That's another map. Let's do the chakras first. The chakras are another map, an energy map. I think it's a scientifically valid thing to say that we grow from the tailbone up in terms of more complication in the body. It is easy for me to see the sexuality and the vitality that exist. If I opened the drawer of the body around the tailbone and the pubic bone, I would see the organs of generation. I would see erotic, tissue, and I would see highly innervated structures. And then if I went up to the next drawer, so to speak, and I opened the drawer at the bottom of at the top of the sacrum and the bottom of the spine, I would see real structural, where L5 sits onto the sacrum, very, very structural area, where the legs come into the sacrum at the sacroiliac joint. So it seems to me might be valid to talk about the psychology of structure being located in that area. And then I open the next drawer up, and it's all about the kidneys and the large intestine. And well, that's about elimination. What do I get rid of? What do I call the not me? And so it would seem to me that issues of elimination could be around that area. Open up the next drawer. What do I see? The diaphragm and the stomach and the pancreas. The liver, all about the organs of assimilation. How do I take stuff in? And I certainly find, intuitively, clinically, not scientifically, I absolutely find in my clinic that people who have trouble accepting themselves, people who have trouble feeding themselves, either on a psychic or a physical level, will show up with trouble here. People who are having trouble with eliminating things will show up with trouble around the kidneys, a flexed spine, hyperkyphosis right around the kidneys, and you're dumb not to pay attention to that. I don't care whether it's scientifically valid or not, it's there. So chakras seem to me to make sense to me clinically. I don't know about all the being enlightened in this, and whether this one is a 2-petaled chakra and the other one is a 6-petaled chakra. That's for people, students of that thing to come to. But the idea of the chakras has certainly impressed itself upon me clinically. Chi, I'm going to have a harder time with. Chi I learned about when I was learning Tai Chi and Aikido, Ki in Japanese. And it seems to me a very intuitive idea that I resonate with, that everything has life. It is really the scientific idea that nothing particularly has life, that we keep looking farther and farther, smaller and smaller. We keep finding mechanism, so we're looking for the mechanism of life. I would go the other way. I would say everything, every goddamn thing in the world has chi, has life. It just manifests in different ways, and our way of manifesting chi is a really unique and interesting way of doing it. I've also experienced the flow of chi when I was doing martial arts more regularly. I certainly still feel it now, but that was the time at which I started feeling that flow within my body. So I'm quite sure there is something there called chi. I'm quite sure that nobody scientifically that I know about has measured it or done anything where you could get it. But again, on a very practical, experiential level, I've experienced it, so it's hard to get out of the way. Another one that is not so much in the training world, but is in the manual therapy world, is that there is a pulse in the head between 3 and 12 cycles a minute. It's not the same cycle as your breath. It's not the same cycle as your heartbeat. It's something altogether different. And 3 or 4 different mechanisms have been proposed for how this thing works, and none of them have stood up scientifically, none of them at all. But you can't tell me it isn't there. I have felt it on head after head after head after head. Every head that I have touched since 1982, which is numbers in the thousands, has this pulse in there. So maybe it's my imagination, but I don't think so. It's my experience on person after person after person, and I can communicate it. Somebody else can come over and I can say, can you feel that? And they can feel it. It'll take a while for the science to catch up with the fact of that experience, or maybe it'll take a while and it'll prove that my experience is completely wrong and I was feeling something completely different. Either of those things could happen, I don't know. But I have to go on what I feel clinically, because science is a certain reliable way of sharing, but it's sharing in a very narrow sense. There are other ways of knowing things.
What is your take on psychedelic drugs or psychedelic experiences?
Okay. I grew up in the 60s, and so I had some psychedelic experiences then, and they were very valuable to me, I have to say. I'm not sure that I would recommend them now, both because of the quality of the psychedelics and because the zeitgeist has changed. However, there's this to be said for it. We humans probably share the cultural history of arboreal apes. The fact that we have a collarbone, the fact that our rib cage is so wide from left to right and not so deep from front to back suggests that instead of being ground dwellers, look at dogs, horses, they all have rib cages that are narrow from left to right and deep from front to back because they want to have the shoulders close to the center of gravity. We actually have a bone that pushes our shoulders way out from the center of gravity because that's really good if you want to go from branch to branch. So when you crawl up when our ancestors presumably crawled up off the ground into the trees and started living in the trees, you don't smell so much in the trees. On the ground, your nose and the whole world of smell and different smells is huge. Have you seen the inside of a deer's nose? There are so many chambers in there, and deer can differentiate thousands and thousands of smells and smell things that we could no longer smell, just as the beagle sniffs out your psychedelic drugs when you're going through the airport. The dogs and deer have incredible nose brains. You have a nose brain too. It's called your frontal lobe. However, your nose is so ineffective. Human noses are really very, very insensitive compared to most animals. Most of the part of your brain that was your nose brain, your rhinencephalon, has become your forebrain, which is your planning center. They used to go up in here with a scalpel and cut your forebrain. That was a frontal lobotomy, cutting off the frontal lobe. And that stops you from planning anything and makes you fairly docile if you were an aggressive person. This is not done, I don't think, anymore, but it was done a great deal in the 30s. It's a very simple operation, but it is absolutely devastating to the personality of the person because as humans, we took this part of the brain and turned it into a selection device, turned it into the attention sender, so that we can send our attention. We can't smell very many things, but we can push our attention. So right now, you're probably not paying attention to how your bum is on the seat, how your butt is touching the seat. But now that I've called your attention to it, all of a sudden you're paying attention to the sensors in your fascia and in your skin under there. And whether you're paying attention to them or not, you'll probably shift every minute and a half, because I do go on and talk, don't I? But the rest of the time, once you start getting interested in what I'm saying again, you'll lose your attention on those sensations coming from your butt. You'll still move every minute and a half because those sensations will be coming up and being read by your lower brain, but your filter will have tuned them out from your upper brain so that you can pay attention to the sound of my voice or to the fly crawling on your shoulder or whatever it is that you're paying attention to. So we have a filter other animals don't have, which means we can pay selective attention to one sense or the other, or to our own thought process, which has made us really, really powerful thinkers, powerful planners, powerful. We can throw so well that we can throw something at Mars millions of miles away and not just hit Mars. That's easy. We can throw something at Mars so skillfully that we can put it in orbit around this tiny planet that's 60 million miles away. It is astounding what we can do with throwing by having had this part of the brain turned off from being a nose brain and turned on to being a selective attender. The trouble, the other edge of that sword, is that selective attender allows us not to pay attention to things that are going on in our body. Dogs, horses, and other higher mammals have much less of that ability to turn off the pain in their leg, to not pay attention to the pain in their back. Whereas we can sit at the computer and, fascinated with what we're doing at the computer, can ignore, in fact, hardly even feel the pain in our back as we do our scribbling, and only feel it when we turn our attention away from that and try to straighten up. So we have this ability to have psychosomatic disorders because we have this ability not to pay attention to some signals coming up from our bodies. You asked about psychedelic drugs at the beginning. So what does this have to do with psychedelic drugs? The idea from mescaline, from LSD, from ayahuasca, DMT as I understand it, and I am not a chemist and do not understand the specifics of these drugs, so I'm talking in a very general way, is to simply eliminate the filter. So that instead of getting filtered sets of sensations, the ones you allow versus the ones you disallow, you are flooded by the natural, untrammeled, unfiltered sensations. This, in and of itself, can be very pleasant, can be very unpleasant, depending on whether you're having a good trip or a bad trip, but it's not very important. The important part, it seems to me, once you've had the fun of the trip itself, is what did you take away from that? If you take away other sets of sensations that you start to pay attention to, compassion for other people, paying more attention to your body, a sense of yourself or a sense of your heart or a sense of your organs that you didn't have before, that seems to me to be quite valuable. A valuable experience. It was, for me, a valuable experience to drop the frames by which Tom was constructed out of his youth, which involved a lot of emotional suppression, involved a lot of value on doing an accomplishment that framed myself in as a man as opposed to a woman, and what that meant. There were these various frames, various levels of frame, like gender, like your culture, like your class, like your background, all of those things, which psychedelics, for me, was really valuable in being able to see those frames and then being able to choose whether I wanted to put them back. So I still sit here in my collared shirt and my hair swept back, and I look fairly New England. I can't stop looking white. But I feel like I have dropped a great many of those things inside myself, and that I am able to be and able to understand other things because I took that opportunity to wipe that filter. I think you can do this through meditation, you can do this through chanting, you can do this through all different, you can do this by getting yourself so damn tired, by exerting yourself to your utmost. That's the time when visions come. You know, Indians took peyote, but they also went out and, I'm talking about Native Americans in this case, but they also went out and did solos in the wilderness for weeks. That may be way more valuable in getting this filter to come down than taking a drug, but going out by yourself in the wilderness is not available to modern urban people. So maybe a drug to drop that filter is one way to open the doors of perception, as Aldous Huxley said. Just for those of you who are choosing the path of physical training of the body, be it yoga, be it CrossFit. I don't really mind. I'm not involved in the internecine warfares between what's better than what and whether this yoga is better than that yoga and all of that kind of stuff. That stuff interests me not at all. What interests me is that this is an incredibly important time to seize the truth of this path, because we are a very visually and auditorily dominant culture. The neurolinguistic programming people talk about 3 ways in which you primarily learn. You learn visually, you learn auditorially, and you learn kinesthetically. And we're very visually and auditorily dominant. The web is a visual and auditory medium. You can't convey feeling down the web. You can convey vision, you can convey sound. Look at school. It's predominantly audio-visual, and everything that's kinesthetic is being taken away. What do I mean by kinesthetic? I mean an art where you use your body. Well, doing art is kinesthetic. Playing music is kinesthetic. It is a physical skill. And dance, obviously, is kinesthetic. Sports are kinesthetic, and you can say there's lots of money in sports, and I will say yes, there's lots of money in sports for the people who are really good at it, but there's no money in sports for the people who are lousy at it, who actually need the kinesthetic education. We are on the edge of a revolution. This is going to be a revolution in biomechanics. The old biomechanics that we had is going by the wayside. We've talked about tensegrity, we've talked about fascia, we've talked about anatomy trains. All of these are aspects of the new biomechanics, but it's coming at us at a great speed. The old biomechanics of physiotherapy, the old biomechanics that training has used, is going by the wayside. Not because it's wrong, but because it's not adequate to explain the kinds of things that we're seeing now. Newton wasn't wrong, and Einstein replaced his wrongness. Newton was right for this set of circumstances, but it didn't work out here and out here. Einstein made a theory that worked out here and out here. Biomechanics that we've had worked for the last 400 years. It's kind of showing some signs of where we need to expand this with tensegrity, we need to expand this with whole systems work. It's happening, but you're right in the middle of it, where people have been taught in the old biomechanics and are trying to get themselves to the new biomechanics. It's really important that we get that out there. At the same time, we are coming to a place on the planet where we have done all the frontiers. There's no more West anymore in America. Everybody's met. The whole world around is in one place. We're in this together, and all over the world. The demands of hunting-gathering are gone. There are no more hunting-gathering societies, maybe somewhere way out in the Amazon or the Philippines, but it's done. They've all come in contact with agricultural. But you know what? Agricultural is dying too. It took 67% of the population to bring in the crops in 1860. Do you know what it takes now? 3%. 63% of the population have been freed from making food and have moved to the city to eat the food, but not to have anything to do with producing it. Therefore, they are not swinging hay bales, they are not swinging scythes, they are not actively involved in the creation of food. Yes, they're walking around the cities, but they're spending a lot of time in chairs in front of the next big revolution, not just industrial, where I was putting widgets on a car, but now we're going electronic, where really everything is happening 25 centimeters in front of you. And so many kids, the kids are doing wonderful things on snowboards and on those kites flying off the water in the kites. It's beautiful. It's amazing to see. I'm so happy to see that, but it's a small percentage of the population. There's so much of the rest of the population that is really so tied to their machines, and we're not putting that one back in the bottle, are we? We all love to be connected. I'm 65 years old. You take my iPhone away from a day, I'm jonesing for it. We love to be connected. Everybody loves to be connected. We're not putting that one back in the bottle and all going to go live on an organic farm and work hard. That's not the way it's going to be. We have to know, and you're going to tell us, trainers, Pilates people, yoga people, all the people in movement, phys ed teachers, physiotherapists, we need to know what is kinesthetic literacy. We need to know, what does a child need to know to make it on this planet in terms of their physical movement? How fast do they need to be? With computers, you better be fast with your reflexes if you're going to succeed in this world. So reflexes is something that we should be training. We don't need repetitive movement and competitive movement so much anymore. We need originality in movement. We need balance in that movement. We need the whole body to be employed in the movement. And that's not being taught anywhere in the schools right now. So socially, this is a very interesting time to be a trainer. There's two disadvantages to coming into this profession right now. One is it's so young, it's changing every 5 years. So don't hang on to anything. The idea that you had about CrossFit, about what fascia does, about how muscles work, that idea is probably going to be gone in 5 years because this whole new revolution in biomechanics is turning things over. So hold whatever you know lightly. Even the scientific truths are being overturned fairly regularly. So you're in a young place, you're in a place that's quite young, but it's developing very fast. That's the advantage. The disadvantage is it's hard to know anything. The advantage is it's moving really quickly. And so it's a very good time, but keep your eyes on the prize, which is we need to know for all the kids in the schools, not just the good athletes, not just the ones who are going to be able to lift. We need to know for all the kids, what is kinesthetic literacy? What corresponds to the minimum program or the best program for people to be able to get good biomechanics out of their bodies and have their bodies last into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and even the hundreds, which is what any students you have can be expected to live into their hundreds. That is a long time to keep their joints going and everything going smoothly and to keep the spine going. Start now. You're doing really important work, and it's really important that that work be codified and understood for the next generation.
To get a person to attain close to perfect biomechanics, and if that did happen, how long do you think that person might live organically without technology?
Okay. I suppose it would be possible for someone to reach perfect biomechanics for their body. That's the first thing that we have to say is my biomechanics and your biomechanics are going to be different. My brother is 6'5" and his biomechanics are different from other people. So I don't think there is an ideal biomechanics, but you can get close to that for your body type. And then we'd be talking about how long can the structure survive. I would say they would probably be stopped by something else, yes? By cancer or COPD or something that arose from their chemistry rather than something from their biomechanics. My mom is 97. Her mind is very sharp. Her legs don't work. She's in a wheelchair and will be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. And I can track why that happened to her in terms of her not using her hips. And I would go to her month upon month and say, Mom, you'll do a lot better if you sit down this way. I'm not going to do it because I get out of the camera thing here. But just teaching her the biomechanics of sitting down and getting up, using her hip joints and her hip muscles properly. And she would go, oh, yes, dear. Oh, yes, dear. And I would come back the next week and she would be doing it kind of flopping into the couch. And she's paying the price at 97. So how long could the structural body go on? We don't know. But I don't see any reason that already our natural joints outlive any biomechanical joints that science has been able to make. You have to replace a hip every 20 years. You have to replace a knee every 15 years. They're getting a little better, but our own joints last 70 or 80 years, and properly used, they should last longer than the rest of our body. Then we're starting to talk about telomeres, things genetically that are making us old and that are going to kill us rather than our biomechanics.
What do you think in terms of fascia in relation to disease, like cancer, heart disease, things along those lines? Is balancing the fascia going to be beneficial in essentially preventing those kinds of illnesses? How do you think that might be, if so?
I really have no idea. I think that because people have so many different ideas about what cancer is and how it forms and how environmental versus genetic versus psychologically generated it is. So could having really good biomechanics and balanced fascia, well, that's going to keep the hydration even. You're not going to have areas of dehydration. It would bring new proteins to areas of inflammation, and I think a lot of heart disease is inflammatory. So you're kind of out of my realm. I'm not a medical person. But the thing that I would say is that we're talking about a coherent, cohesive pattern in a human being. You will stay naughty as long as you are a coherent, cohesive person. When you die, your cohesiveness will disintegrate really rapidly. And even though your molecules are changing all the time, you have a new stomach lining every 3 weeks, you have a new liver every 6 weeks. You've changed all the molecules in your liver every 6 weeks because it's so turning around. It takes 7 years to change all the molecules in all of your body, and that's only because your fascia is so slow to change its molecules that it takes 7 years for all of the collagen to turn over its molecules. So I'm 65 years old. I've changed my molecules presumably 9 times. I don't have any of the molecules that I originally started out with in my body. I might not have any of those molecules. And yet I'm recognizably Tom. My mother still knows me and recognizes not only my face but my characteristics as being that of the young person. But my molecules have completely changed. So it's not the stuff that makes us, it's patterns that make us. You know, I was attracted to your name, Functional Patterns, because that's what I'm looking at, is the pattern in the body. It's not the stuff of the body. We kind of get too stuck on the stuff sometimes. It's the pattern of how it relates, the pattern of how it coheres, and the pattern of how it moves in relationship to each other that makes for that. I believe I might be proven wrong. I'm 65 years old. I might get an illness that I didn't even know I had coming. And I've certainly had friends who've had heart attacks that they didn't know were coming. But I believe, so this is just a belief, folks. This is not science. I believe that if you remember yourself, if you are aware of yourself in all of its complexity, that those kinds of diseases will have a very much harder time getting started. Autoimmune diseases like lupus or multiple sclerosis, that cancer, which I think is a disease of forgetting. I'm not sure it's cigarettes that cause lung cancer, but forgetting your lungs that causes the lung cancer. I'm out there now. I realize I'm out there on the medical side of this thing. But that's what I observe with my clients who have had cancer, is that there is an overuse or a forgetting of that part of the body. I'm thinking of somebody who had throat cancer. He had a very particular voice. Well before he had cancer, he had a way of using his voice that was so different, and that had indicated that he kind of pushed his voice into that corner. And therefore there was all this forgotten area of his voice. And it's in those forgotten areas that these diseases can get started. So my theory, total theory, not backed up by any medical science, is if we help people remember themselves in their fullness, and I do that through body work, you do that through taking them through patterns of movement with which they're unfamiliar. Yoga does that by stretching people in places where they're not stretching. There are all kinds of ways of approaching this. And there's no one particular way of doing it. But the more people self-remember, the less those diseases have an opportunity to take hold. We all have cancer cells running around in our body right now. You have cells in a cancerous condition running around your body. I don't want to say so, but it's, that's the likelihood, because we all do. But they never take hold. They only get to take hold and start to grow a colony of the similar kinds of cells if there's a place where they can latch onto and do that. And I think they can only do that in a place that you've forgotten or deliberately put away from yourself. And that the more you include yourself, the less likely you are to come up with those diseases.
What's the point of all this? What's the point of your existence?
Learning. I have struggled with that question. I am paraphrasing E.B. White here, but I don't have the actual quote. But if the world were only beautiful, it would be easy to know what to do every day when you wake up. Get up and appreciate the world. It's beautiful. Appreciate that beauty. And if the world were nothing but suffering, it would be easy to know what to do with your day. Get up and alleviate that suffering. Do anything that you can to help alleviate the suffering in yourself or in the world. The trouble is that the world is equally achingly beautiful and achingly full of suffering. Yes, both of those things are going on. It makes it hard to plan your day. What do you do? And we all find our way in that thing. How much are we alleviating the suffering in the world? How much are we appreciating the beauty? And there's room for people at both ends. Artists who do nothing but create beauty, and people who go to Africa to alleviate the suffering. There's room for everybody, and we're all somewhere along that spectrum in the world. But it seems to me that the only thing that makes any sense, I don't know whether it's true, but it's the most valuable attitude for me to hold, is Earth as school. I'm on this planet to learn and to add to the learning, and when I get recycled back into the Earth, hopefully what I have learned carries on, either through my students or in some way in the noosphere, in the sphere of thought, the sphere of ideas that go around the planet. I don't know how that educational inheritance works, but I'm hoping that I'm learning something. I'm hoping that that learning is being conveyed somehow into the world. Nothing else makes particular sense to me. I don't particularly want to go to heaven. I don't want to go to hell either. I don't really know whether there's a life after this one. So learning is the thing that has most organized my life.
What are your views upon the world around us in reference to humans living on this world?
I think I'm paraphrasing Buckminster Fuller in saying I think the role of the humans on the world is for the world to be able to appreciate itself. I see that in the higher animals, that there is those kinds of appreciation, but there's something in the human way of appreciating the world which is unique to humans. I don't know about whales because we destroyed the whole culture of whales before we even found out what their stories were or how complex their songs were or what kind of communications they were having. Whatever kind of communications are left now that we've decimated them, I feel as bad about our destruction of the whales as I do about our destruction of the Native American tribes when we arrived from Europe. But there is, in spite of all that sadness and suffering, there is this thing in humans that turns around and looks at the world and appreciates it and describes it and models it. And I think that is a very interesting process that's going on now. Along with that, let me change tacks and think about this in another way. Human beings on the planet are like an egg, like a chicken egg. A chicken egg is inside its shell, and you've got 21 days to make a chicken. The yolk is the fuel, and the white is the part that makes the chicken. But in the form of an egg, that's just pure amino acids. That's just pure protein and water. So somehow fertilization, this magic of fertilization, starts this thing in the middle of the egg that starts to create a chicken. It creates the chicken out of the white, and it uses the yolk as fuel, the fat and the sugar in the yolk as fuel to make a chicken. Now, the process of making a chicken out of the egg white produces waste products, produces pee, produces urea, produces other things that can't be used. And they can't get out of the shell. So the pollution is stuck inside the shell, and the dilemma of a chicken egg is, can I make a chicken out of that much yolk in 21 days without killing myself with the poison in the process? A rotten egg is one that didn't make it. The poison killed the little chick before it made it into a fully developed chick. Most eggs do, in fact, develop into a chicken. The chicken pecks its way out of the egg and becomes a chicken that's living on grain and living from the outside. Self-sustaining, so to speak. But all during that time in the egg, it's stuck with this amount of fuel, and it's creating its own pollution, so it's stuck with the amount of pollution it creates. We're in the same place, humans on this planet. We are living off the yolk. It took the sun 3 billion years to make the yolk of oil and coal. 3 billion years, and $100 a barrel. If you charged the electricity at today's rate, it would cost, $1,000 a barrel to make oil. We're selling it at $100 a barrel, and we're pulling it out of the ground in 100 years. It's amazing. And we're burning it at 3 to 4% efficiency. And the rest of that is going into the egg, into the shell, which is our atmosphere and our oceans. You know, we found out recently that the oceans are taking up so much more carbon than we thought. The atmosphere is subject to so much more carbon than we thought. Are there too many humans on the planet? Maybe. Are the humans that are on the planet currently burning too much of the fossil fuel? Yes, we're taking the energy of the yolk and turning it into pollution really fast without much efficiency. We're not taking the energy of the yolk, the gas and the oil and the coal that are in the ground, and using it at such efficiency. We're instead exporting heat, exporting carbon dioxide into the thing. So we have to ask ourselves, are we an egg that's going to make it? Are we going to get self-sufficient, by which I mean that we're living off the tide and the sun energy and the wind energy, the kind of energy that doesn't go away when you use it, versus the yolk of the egg, which is the kind of energy that goes away when you use it, coal, oil, and gas? Are we going to make it as a chicken and come out and be self-sustaining before we've used up the yolk, or before we've poisoned ourselves with the effluvia of burning off the yolk of the planet in such short order at such low levels of efficiency? I think we're right on the cusp of whether that makes it or not. And I started out in the political movements of the 1960s, that it was obvious that the Vietnam War was folly and needed to be stopped. It was obvious that blacks and others needed voting rights and should be let in. That whole political movement really seized me in the 1960s and made perfect sense. And after that came the environmental movement, and I've been speaking now about the environment, and that makes perfect sense to me. And then I came on to this whole bodywork thing and the body training, and you could say, oh, that's much more selfish and much more small. I don't think so. I think doing training, doing bodywork is political work and it's environmental work, because the more we make people aware of their bodies, the more they will understand the earth as a system and start to treat the earth as a system. So I value all the people who are still out there doing political work. I value all the people who are still out there doing environmental work. I feel I am doing my political and environmental work by cultivating this knowledge of the body, the way the body pattern works, and conservation of our own energy will help with the conservation of the energy out there. So actually, I am pretty hopeful about humans on the planet. I think we're going to make it. I really like the younger generation and the way they're going about things. I do not think they're slackers, and I think they've got a lot together. I also think that the whole society, the whole commercial society, is moving them away from their bodies by the use of advertising, by the use of protective house arrest. Most kids are under protective house arrest. They go from their house to the school, to the after-school activity, back to their house. The whole thing of being outside has been taken away. So I'm really eager to see what will happen with the younger generation if we can keep a sense of the body, keep a sense of movement, pouring into these folks, not just with the value of athletics, but with the value of just actually functionally living your life in your body. Because this is not just about how much you can lift, it's about how much you can love. How much can you open up to somebody else and let them in? It's so important, that, and it's a physical skill. At least it's partially a physical skill. I'm going on too long, but you get the idea here. The life of the body is environmental, political, as well as a self-development piece.
Any other things you'd like to mention, say?
I think I've done it. I think I'm there.
All right, brother. Well, thank you very much, man. I think I probably still have